Hi class, today we're going to look at the right to vote as part of our beginning of the chapter on voters and voter behavior. Successful democratic governments depend on the participation of its citizens through voting. The history of the United States has been marked by a steady expansion of the electorate through the elimination of the restrictions that had formerly been on voting qualifications. Our objectives with this video are we're going to summarize the history of voting rights in the United States, and we'll identify and explain constitutional restrictions on the state's power to set voting qualifications. To get through this chapter, you should know the following vocabulary: the meaning of suffrage and franchise, which are essentially the same thing, and electorate. Soon, you'll be eligible to vote if you're not already, but will you exercise that right? The record suggests that while you may do so, many of your friends will not, at least not for some time. The record also suggests that some of your friends will never vote, yet clearly the success of democratic government depends on popular participation, and in particular on the regular and informed exercise of the right to vote. The history of voting rights. The framers of the Constitution purposely left the power to set suffrage qualifications to each state. Suffrage means the right to vote. Franchise is another term with the same meaning. Expansion of the electorate. When the Constitution went into effect in 1789, the right to vote in the United States was restricted to white male property owners. In fact, probably not 1 in 15 adult white males could vote in elections in the different states. Benjamin Franklin often lampooned this situation. He told of a man whose only property was a jackass and noted that the man would lose the right to vote if his jackass dies. Now, asked Franklin, in whom is the right of suffrage? In the man or in the jackass? Today, the size of the American electorate, or the potential voting population, is truly impressive. More than 205 million people, nearly all citizens who are at least 18 years of age, can qualify to vote. That huge number is a direct result of the legal definition of suffrage. In other words, it is the result of those laws that determine who can and cannot vote. It is also the result of some 200 years of continuing, often bitter, and sometimes violent struggle. The history of American suffrage since 1789 has been marked by two long-term periods. First, the nation has experienced the gradual elimination of several restrictions on the right to vote. These restrictions are based on such factors as religious belief, property ownership, tax payment, race, and sex. Second, a significant share of what was originally the state's power over the right to vote has gradually been assumed by the federal government. Extending suffrage, the 5 stages. The growth of the American electorate to its present size and shape has come in 5 fairly distinct stages. The 2 trends described above, the elimination of voting restrictions and growing federal control over voting, are woven throughout these stages. You will see several illustrations of both of these trends over the course of this chapter. Number 1. The first stage of the struggle to extend voting rights came in the early 1800s. Religious qualifications, instituted in colonial days, quickly disappeared. No state has had a religious test for voting since 1810. Then, one by one, states began to eliminate property ownership and tax payment qualifications. By mid-century, almost all white males could vote in every state. 2. The second major effort to broaden the electorate followed the Civil War. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, was intended to protect any citizen from being denied the right to vote because of race or color. Still, for nearly another century, African Americans were systematically prevented from voting, and they remained the largest group of disenfranchised citizens in the nation's population. 3. The 19th Amendment prohibited the denial of the right to vote because of sex. Its ratification in 1920 completed the third expansion of suffrage. Wyoming, while still a territory, had given women the vote in 1869. By 1920, more than half of the states had followed that lead. 4. A fourth major extension took place during the 1960s. During that time, federal legislation and court decisions focused on securing African Americans a full role in the electoral process in all states. With the passage and vigorous enforcement of a number of civil rights acts, especially the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its later extensions, racial equality finally became fact in polling booths throughout the country. The 23rd Amendment, passed in 1961, added the voters of the District of Columbia to the presidential electorate. The 24th Amendment, ratified in 1964, eliminated the poll tax, as well as any other tax, as a condition for voting in any federal election. 5. The fifth and latest extension of the electorate came with the adoption of the 26th Amendment in 1971. It provides that no state can set the minimum age for voting at more than 18 years of age. In other words, those 18 and over were given the right to vote by this amendment. The power to set voting qualifications. The Constitution does not give the federal government the power to set suffrage qualifications. Rather, that matter is reserved to the states. The Constitution does, however, place 5 restrictions on how the states use that power. 1. Any person whom a state allows to vote for members of the most numerous branch of its own legislature must be allowed to vote for representatives and senators in Congress. This restriction is of little real meaning today. With only minor exceptions, each of the states allows the same voters to vote in all elections within the state. 2. No state can deprive any person of the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This is the 15th Amendment. 3. No state can deprive any person of the right to vote on account of sex. This is the 19th Amendment. 4. No state can require the payment of any tax as a condition for taking part in the nomination or election of any federal office holder. That is, no state can levy any tax in connection with the selection of the president, the vice president, or members of Congress. This is the 24th Amendment. 5. No state can deprive any person who is at least 18 years of age of the right to vote because of age. This is the 26th Amendment. Beyond these 5 restrictions, remember that no state can violate any other provision in the Constitution in the setting of suffrage qualifications, or in anything else it does. A case decided by the Supreme Court in 1975 called Hill v. Stone illustrates this point. The court struck down a section of the Texas Constitution that declared that only those persons who owned taxable property could vote in city bond elections. The court found the drawing of such distinction for voting purposes between those who do and those who do not own taxable property to be an unreasonable classification, prohibited by the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause.